In a small town tucked away from the noise of modern life, lived a woman named Ruth. She wasn't famous, she didn't write books, she didn't speak on stages, but those who met her never forgot her. Not because of how she looked, in fact no one really knew, but because of how she made them feel, seen, heard, and whole. Ruth had a secret, a quiet decision she made as a young woman that shaped the next 7 decades of her life. She stopped looking in the mirror, completely. Not for makeup, not for hair, not even for checking if her blouse was straight. While the rest of the world became obsessed with appearances, selfies, wrinkles, filters, comparisons, Ruth chose something radically different. She chose to live without a reflection. At first, people thought it was a phase. Maybe she was religious or going through something personal. But years passed, then decades, and Ruth remained committed. When asked why, she'd smile gently and say, "The more I looked at myself, the less I liked who I was. But when I stopped looking, I started feeling who I was, and what she felt was enough." This isn't a story about vanity, it's about value. It's about how one woman preserved her self-esteem in a world that teaches us to tear it apart. We often talk about health as something physical: blood pressure, cholesterol, bone density. But what about emotional health? What about the part of us that whispers, "I am enough," when the mirror says otherwise? That's what Ruth mastered. She wasn't blind, she just didn't need to measure herself with glass. Instead, she measured herself through moments. The joy of helping her neighbors, the pleasure of tending her garden, the warmth of handwritten letters sent to friends far away. And perhaps most incredibly, as she aged, she never feared her reflection, because she had long since released its power over her. How mirror avoidance changed her brain, her mood, and her life. For most people, avoiding mirrors sounds like insecurity. But for Ruth, it was the opposite. It was liberation. In her early 20s, like many young women, she wrestled with self-image. She remembered trying on dress after dress and criticizing every angle. She recalled pulling at her skin in the mirror, wondering if she'd ever be enough to be loved. Until one day, after a tearful morning in front of the mirror, she asked herself a question that changed everything. What if I don't need to look at myself to know who I am? And from that moment, she stopped. It wasn't easy. At first, her brain screamed for validation. She'd feel the temptation to glance at a window's reflection. She'd walk by the bathroom and instinctively reach for the mirror. But she resisted, and something fascinating began to happen. Her anxiety started to fade. Her thoughts grew quieter. Her focus shifted, outward, not inward. She paid more attention to people's voices, not their faces. She listened longer, hugged tighter, laughed more freely. Without the constant mental chatter of "how do I look?" her emotional bandwidth expanded. It wasn't just a psychological change. It was neurological. Modern neuroscience supports this. Studies show that frequent mirror checking, especially with self-critical thoughts, activates the brain's default mode network, a system linked to rumination, self-judgment, and even depression. But when people reduce self-focus, that system quiets down. They become more present, less reactive, emotionally resilient. That's what happened to Ruth. By choosing not to see herself, she saw the world more clearly. She developed a keen sense of empathy. She noticed when people were uncomfortable, not because of how they looked, but because of how they felt. She could tell when someone needed encouragement, even if they smiled. And she offered it, freely, sincerely. Ruth became the woman people called when they needed someone to remind them they mattered. And here's the beautiful irony. Even though she hadn't looked in a mirror for decades, others always described her as radiant, calming, and so beautiful, it made you forget everything else. She didn't need her own reflection. She had become a reflection of confidence without vanity. What happened to her body image, health, and confidence over 70 years? Many people wonder, if you never look in a mirror, don't you lose control of your appearance? Don't you age poorly? Let yourself go? That's the assumption. But Ruth's story proved otherwise. Despite not checking mirrors, she never appeared disheveled. Her clothes were clean and coordinated. Her posture was upright. Her skin glowed with the quiet strength of a woman who had made peace with herself. She developed routines not based on appearance, but on how she felt. If her body felt stiff, she stretched. If she noticed fatigue, she rested. If she noticed tension, she meditated or took a walk. She didn't monitor her body visually. She listened to it intuitively. Her meals were simple, plant-based, and colorful. Not because they looked good on a plate, but because they made her feel light and energized. And the result? At 60, she was still hiking hills. At 75, she danced at her granddaughter's wedding. At 92, she moved with grace and clarity that most 70-year-olds would envy. And perhaps most shocking of all, she never once suffered from body dysmorphia, diet obsession, or cosmetic anxiety. Why? Because she never created a battlefield around her reflection. She never saw flaws in her wrinkles or damage in her aging body. She saw life. She never compared herself to airbrushed images because she never gave those images permission to define her worth. And here's what made it even more powerful. Ruth never criticized others for looking in the mirror. She didn't preach. She didn't judge. She simply lived as a quiet example. People around her began to notice the peace she carried, the way she didn't seek validation through compliments or fear judgment in public. And many started to reflect on their own habits. They asked themselves, why do I check the mirror so often? What am I looking for? Who am I trying to please? Ruth's mirrorless life acted as a mirror for others, showing them what was possible when you untangle your self-worth from your reflection. She taught people that confidence isn't something you see, it's something you feel. And that real self-love doesn't always come from fixing your appearance. Sometimes it comes from letting go of it entirely. The psychology behind mirror-free living and how it builds unshakable self-worth. In a world obsessed with perfection, Ruth's lifestyle seemed almost rebellious. But there's growing psychological research that supports her way of living. Mirror checking, especially when frequent and emotionally charged, is often tied to appearance-based self-esteem, a fragile form of self-worth that fluctuates based on how we look. This type of self-esteem is easily shaken by a bad hair day, a few extra pounds, a wrinkle in the wrong place, or worse, someone else's highlight reel on social media. But Ruth's identity was rooted in something deeper. She built her self-esteem on values: kindness, curiosity, honesty, loyalty. These traits don't fade with age. They don't depend on symmetry, lighting, or skin tone. They are timeless. By disconnecting from her image, she reconnected with her essence. And psychologists say that this is exactly what long-term emotional stability requires. Self-worth that's internal, not external. It's the difference between saying, I am valuable because I look good, versus I am valuable because I exist, because I love, because I contribute. And here's the kicker. People with internal self-worth are less anxious in social situations, more resilient during aging, less prone to depression and eating disorders, more likely to form deep, authentic relationships. Ruth had all of this. She wasn't loud, she wasn't flashy, but she was unshakable. Even when age crept in, when her hands wrinkled, when her hair grayed, when her skin sagged, she never once asked, "Do I still look good?" She asked, "Did I love well today?" That was her mirror. And when you live by that question, aging becomes less terrifying. You stop fearing losing your looks because you never built your identity around them. People often assume that avoiding mirrors is about shame, but Ruth showed the opposite. It was about freedom. Freedom from judgment. Freedom from cultural standards. Freedom from needing to be anything other than herself. And ironically, that freedom made her magnetic. People listened when she spoke. They leaned in. They trusted her. Because her presence wasn't performative, it was real. And in a world where most people are performing, that realness was irresistible. Her advice at 92: if I could tell young people one thing. When Ruth turned 92, her great-granddaughter asked her a simple question. "Grandma Ruth, if you could go back and tell your 20-year-old self one thing, what would it be?" She paused. Then, with the same calm voice she'd always had, she said, "I'd tell her to stop asking if she's pretty and start asking if she's kind." That sentence lingered in the room like a truth everyone had been waiting to hear. Because Ruth knew, even at 92, that most young people still define themselves by the mirror. She'd seen generations fall into the same trap, comparing their bodies instead of connecting with their hearts, confusing appearance with identity, mistaking image for impact. So her message was simple but radical. Your worth is not in your reflection. It's in your direction. Where are you going? Who are you helping? What are you building? These are the questions that shaped her life. And the answers, not her cheekbones or wardrobe, were what made her unforgettable. She believed that the greatest beauty isn't seen, it's felt. It's the comfort in someone's voice when they say, "You matter." It's the way a person listens without checking their phone. It's the presence of someone who doesn't need to be the center of attention to feel complete. That was Ruth. And in a world addicted to validation, she became a quiet revolution. She never looked in a mirror, and yet reflected light into everyone around her. She aged without shame. She lived without comparisons. She loved without conditions. At 92, she had no regrets. Not because her life was perfect, but because she never wasted it chasing the illusion of perfection. So if you're watching this, wondering how to build self-worth that lasts, maybe it's not about finding the right skincare or the right filter or the right angle. Maybe it's about asking better questions. Am I proud of who I am today? Did I help someone feel less alone? Did I love without needing to impress? That's what matters. If Ruth's story moved you, please give this video a like. It helps others find messages like this. And don't forget to subscribe to Human Health Hub for more powerful human stories that go beyond the surface and straight to the soul. You are more than what you see. You are who you are becoming. See you in the next story.